we hear you very well. Sorry, I
Okay.
didn't have my microphone. Listening.
Wonderful. So thank you very much, Professor Dax, for the introduction. Shalom, everybody in the audience. I'm Israeli, but I'm here in Berlin. I will speak in English. As Professor Dax already mentioned, the topic...
Share the screen, Assaf.
Ah.
It's not shared.
Sent a request.
I think it's on your side, on the Israeli side, we sent a request to share the screen.
We allowed.
Allowed.
It's allowed now. Okay, we can do it now.
Now we can do it. So now I hope you see.
Yes.
This was the previous. Yeah. And now you can see hopefully the presentation and hear me as well. So just to open up and say that as Professor Dax already mentioned, the topic of German television and Israeli audiences is of course intertwined with the German-Israeli relations as a whole. And I'm sure, as you know, the attitude of Israel towards Germany, towards Germanness, underwent an immense and positive change since both countries were established. Animosity turned to cooperation, global interests aligned, boycotts were dropped, and we are all aware how economic and defense considerations manifested in bilateral agreements, diplomatic relations, booming scientific relations, and much more. And as one may assume, the societal aspect of the warming up of the relationship was kept as a last step, because their connection between people they go beyond immediate interests and political interests. So just to put it on a concrete timeline, until 1967, Israel had kind of in one way or another, basically a prohibition of German language films, and questions of forgiveness and whether Israeli society should be open to Germanness, to German films, even German productions in general, like culture, like plays in the cinema, plays in the theater, were forbidden. So the subject of Israeli and openness to German society was gradually becoming better and better. And I find it interesting, as Gisela said in the beginning, about the history. Today we have a conference in Berlin by Haaretz, and today we have a Leo Beck conference in the Israel Museum in Tel Aviv. So this is a sign that indeed times have changed. The key point of change, also as mentioned, was perhaps the reunification of Germany and the importance of Israel to this new Germany. Germany's image underwent a facelift, as Professor Moshe Zimmerman called it. And along with that, Germany invested a lot in youth exchanges, in defense cooperation, and that changed gradually the perception of Germany in Israel. Berlin also emerged as a kind of bridge to rehabilitate the image of Germany, because Berlin became a popular tourist destination, because Berlin became a popular place for Israelis to invest in real estate, because Berlin, of course, became a prominent part of German cultural export. So immigration, mass tourism, real estate, even the price of milky, if some of you remember, all helped draw the Israeli public closer and closer to Germany. And as the special relations grew stronger, the openness to German culture and to language also grew. Now, if you look at it from the television perspective, this was almost non-existent. Gisela mentioned two movies and Babylon Berlin, but those were more the exception than the rule. And the fact that German television was almost non-existent in the Israeli public, or as access to the Israeli public, was not a coincidence. This was the result of various reasons, some of them, as we mentioned before, regarding the relations and the sensitivity. Some of them were also technical, and some of them resulted from the way television developed in Israel. And just to remind people, if they don't remember themselves, Israel was a late bloomer when it comes to television. The founders of the country, Ben-Gurion, Sharet, and so on, did not believe the television was necessary. It was only after 1967 that television started in Israel as a way of countering, some researchers say, the propaganda from Arab countries. So Israel only had one channel until the beginning of the 90s, which was an Ausnahme, an exception in the Western democracies. And when it comes to foreign content in that television channel, most was US, as Professor Dax mentioned, Dallas, and afterwards Dynasty, if some people remember, Shoshelet, and also British inspired. So that was the situation until the beginning of the 90s. And then Israel, as it often does, underwent a very fast development, and cable penetrated in the beginning of the 90s. And that brought about, in a very fast period of time, hundreds or dozens, more than 100 foreign TV channels to Israel, which overwhelmed the public. I don't know if you remember this program from Arik Einstein, Moni Mushonov. They made a whole movie about the Israeli viewer being overwhelmed with suddenly the host of a Hungarian Western and a German show, and so on and so on. But again, this exposed Israelis to a variety of foreign channels, but it was not so accessible to the general public. I mean, there were, by 1992, most Israelis had access to, for example, 3 German channels, Sat.1, Dreisat, and RTL, but those channels were transmitted as they are, without subtitles, of course, without dubbing. And they were relegated kind of to the Yeke community, or for people who understood German. The mass Israelis did not have access to this. And this cable revolution underwent more changes as Israel allowed commercial channels like Channel 2, and there was a competition to the cable in the form of Yes, a satellite company, and afterwards something like Partner TV, Cellcom TV. There were a lot of over-the-top services that gradually but very steadily increased the fiction supply to the Israeli public. But until that time, German television was not there. And what we have found out, starting in the research about what went on behind the scenes, was that this was not a coincidence. And we were talking to content buyers from the Israeli side, meaning people who bought the content for Yes, for Hot, for the Israeli public channel. And they said there were 2 main reasons. One is that German television was considered uncool, unimaginative. You can see there is a reason that Tatort did not become a worldwide phenomena in the same way, I don't know, Poirot or Agatha Christie became in British television. And the other one was a more cultural reason, which was that first, the German language was still a factor that deters us, they said, from purchasing series from Germany or from Austria. And secondly, that the issue of the past and showing German series which are connected to lives of Germans, which show some empathy to Germany, which perhaps show a more complex view, were seen as perhaps a threat to the Holocaust survivors or to their children. And it was a bit of too sensitive. So while we had a lot of Danish, Norwegian, British, French, a lot of Spanish telenovelas and so on, the German television did not penetrate to the Israeli crowd, not in the masses that will happen later. And this all changed, if I can change the slide. This all changed in the last decade. As Professor Dax mentioned, the global streaming revolution created new platforms for consumers to consume fictional content. And in a way, it very fast abolished the Israeli gatekeepers that were, how to say, acting based on the decades of prohibition of animosity, of reluctance, of sensitivity. And together with the image of German television, or let's say the lack of interest in German television as a whole, kind of made German television non-existent on the Israeli sphere. So this global streaming revolution did not pass Germany, and we will hear about it from my co-researchers very soon. And Germany started to offer content which was different from the past on a different platform. So when Netflix was launched in Israel in 2016, almost overnight, Israelis had access to something that they didn't have before, which was dozens of shows in German, either subtitled to Hebrew or even perhaps dubbed to English for those who are sensitive or who have a sensitivity to hear the German language. So in a way, a booming supply of German fictional content met a growing demand from the Israeli side. And this demand was boosted by the openness of Israelis to Germany, as we described before. And this is a new meeting, so to say. And this was very, I think it was very wise to see from Professor Dax that this new meeting that happens, suddenly Israelis are consuming German content as a public, and this offers us a lot of research opportunities. And maybe in other words, we all know about Israelis in Berlin. We all know about Israelis who study German language, and it has been studied how do they treat Germanness, how do they adopt. And I remember when I moved to Berlin, the thing that bothered me the most was that all the trees have numbers on them. And this reminded me of the number of my grandfather. And so I was scarred in a way to see Germanness as that. And now we have Israeli public, which is as a whole meeting Germanness on these streaming platforms for the first time. So they have to confront Germany, Germanness, history, their positions, the new Germanness in many ways. So this is the research opportunity that we have. And just to show you, I checked last time, there were more than 95 series and television movies available for Israeli viewers over Netflix alone. And there are more on Amazon and other series. And this is all accessible in a way that was not accessible before. Now, I have to say they are not popular like Spanish telenovelas or like Turkish dramas, but they do find an audience in Israel. And this is, for example, we don't have a lot of data from Netflix, but they produce something called the most watched. They don't give exact numbers, but we can see that several German series, you can see here 1899, which was a follow-up series to Dark, which was the first big German Netflix hit, which kind of boosted the whole industry in Berlin and in Germany, featuring in the top most watched a few weeks in a row. So it's not just 1 week, it's a few weeks in a row. Also the German series Crooks, Nochlim in Hebrew, which deals with Berlin clans a little bit, crime, and so on. And the German, I would say maybe a flagship series is Clio, which also deals with the history of the GDR and with subjects like that, which seem to be very appealing for the Israeli audience. They are all featured in this list together with movies that you can see, All Quiet on the Western Front, for example, and Munich, The Edge of War. So some of these series we focus on because, for example, 1899 and Dark, they are series in German, but they are universal. They talk science fiction and so on. Clio really deals with the history of Germany. I don't know if you have seen it. I don't know if we have time to show the clip, but we can analyze it a little bit
Maybe
better.
we should show the clip. I think that would be a good idea. No?
Cool. That was the trailer for Clio, which was basically an international hit. It was renewed for a second season, and also was popular in Israel. And you can see that German offering also changed. By that trailer, you can see that the German series adopted Tarantino American motives, and they became much more international. And I guess we will talk about it soon. But just to show another small figure from our ongoing research, in which we ask focus groups about the perception of German streaming series, is that there is a growing awareness of German series among the audience. This is from the recruitment database that we have for people to participate in focus groups. And you can see, for example, Dark, which I mentioned before, 50 out of around 200. So this is, I don't know, 25% said that they have seen all episodes. And this is a totally new meeting which happens in the virtual space, a total new consumption of German cultural projects. And because of the uniqueness of German-Israeli relations, we find it to be a very fascinating subject of research. So thank you very much, and looking forward later for the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Assaf. Let's come now.
Yeah.
What do you mean? It's Zeynep first. Okay, so now we're coming to our next two speakers, and will be presented by Zeynep Altundağ. She is a research assistant and a doctoral candidate at the Freie University Berlin. She has already finished her PhD, will be soon called also a doctor, at the Institute for Media and Communication Studies. In her dissertation, she examines how young descendants of labor migrants from Turkey in Germany use social media to construct identities, challenge media stereotypes, and navigate cultural, social, and political discourses. So her research interests include Turkish migration to Germany, social media, ethnic use, media use, and representation, as well as the acculturation of ethnic minorities. Here we have to add also, we do this research about this series also in Germany and with various groups over there that we will be able also to compare. And then the paper is also co-written by Dr. Yulia Yurtaeva-Martens, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department Media and Communication Studies at the Freie University Berlin, and an associated researcher at the Leibniz Institute for Media Research, Hans Bredow Institute in Germany. And she received her PhD at the Film University on the history of intervision and television program exchanges in Eastern Europe during the Cold War. Her research interests cover television, European television history, and particularly the history of media organizations and events from a transnational perspective. So we will listen to our next presentation, which was called the Transnationalization of German TV series in the era of streaming platforms. Please.
Thank you, Professor Dax. Good afternoon. Thank you, organizers, for organizing this conference, despite all the difficulties. As Professor Dax introduced, my name is Zeynep Altundağ. I am a predoctoral researcher at Freie Universität Berlin, and I'm working in the DFG-funded Berlin On Demand project. Today, I'm presenting together with my colleague, Yulia Yurtaeva-Martens, as Professor Dax mentioned, and she's one of the leading members of our research team. Our presentation today, also as mentioned, entitled The Transnationalization of German TV Series in the Era of Streaming Platforms. It draws on our ongoing study, which examines how Berlin-based TV dramas negotiate and export images of Germanness across cultural contents in Germany and in Israel. Our study explores how global streaming platforms influence and transform perceptions of Germanness through contemporary German series. The central objective of our project is to understand how Berlin-based German TV series are received by international audiences in the streaming age across diverse cultural contexts in Israel and Germany. This timeline illustrates how over the past decade, Berlin-based German series have been produced and distributed on online global platforms, from Deutschland 83 and Babylon Berlin to 4 blogs, Clio and Crux. These series have achieved remarkable international visibility, turning Berlin into a recognizable narrative stage for global audiences. Streaming video on-demand platforms are not just distributors, they actively shape transnational flows of narratives and genres. Through these flows, stories increasingly cross national borders and invite viewers to engage with cultures beyond their own, reflecting a multi-sided process of localization and global audience formation. German TV series have taken part in this movement. Once largely limited to domestic audiences, they are now part of international catalogs, especially when set in Berlin. The city serves as both a physical location and a symbolic space that resonates globally, functioning as a mediated space rich in encoded historical and cultural meanings. This shift in how Berlin is represented in streamed series leads us to our central research questions of our study. How do contemporary Berlin-based series construct and reframe Germanness through their narratives and aesthetics? And how are these representations interpreted and negotiated by audiences in Germany and in Israel? In our project, we follow a mixed methods design combining 50 focus group discussions, series and platform analysis, expert interviews, and social media analysis. Our goal is to trace the entire circulation process from production and storytelling to audience interpretation and participation in digital discourse. At the moment, we are conducting our focus group discussions in Israel and in Germany. The process has been running quite smoothly so far, although recruiting participants from minority ethnic groups has been particularly challenging for both sides. In Germany, for instance, we are not having any difficulties in recruiting ethnic Germans, but our main challenge has been recruiting participants from Russian, Turkish, and especially Arab origin minority groups. And this is more or less the same for the Israeli part. When we began this project, our idea was to replicate Liebes and Katz's well-known Dallas study from the 1980s. At that time, they examined how Americanness was received across cultures. We wanted to adapt this to today's approach, context, and explore how Germanness is represented and interpreted in the streaming era by examining Berlin-based series. We choose a replication study because the framework developed by Liebes and Katz still speaks to many of the questions we face today. Although their research was conducted in a completely different media environment, their reception-oriented approach remains highly relevant for understanding how people make sense of television. In our project, we built on their comparative logic between Germany and Israel, but bring it into the digital age. Instead of national broadcasting, we now have global streaming platforms that reach audiences everywhere. A strict replication of their study is no longer feasible. The shift from national broadcasting to global streaming has fundamentally transformed viewing practices. Instead of a few television channels, audiences now access transnational platforms that connect viewers across borders. They no longer merely watch, they comment, share, and remix content. As a result, national images circulate in new ways, personalized, algorithmically mediated, and reinterpreted within diverse cultural contexts. These transformations make replication not only relevant but necessary, as they raise new theoretical and methodological challenges for studying mediated representations in a globalized participatory media environment. In our extended replication study, we combined focus groups and expert interviews conducted in Germany and Israel, complemented by an analysis of online audiences discussions. By looking at both local conversations and digital exchanges, we compare how viewers from different cultural backgrounds interpret Berlin-based TV series. This approach allows us to go beyond audience reactions and explore how these series serve as spaces for negotiating identity, belonging, and cultural difference within a transnational context. Ultimately, our aim is to uncover the deeper processes of meaning-making that shape contemporary television reception. Sorry, I was one slide further. Coming back to this slide on dimensions, in the original Libes and Katz study, the researchers explored how American society and values were reflected through Dallas. We have taken those dimensions and adapted them to our context, examining how German or Germanness themes are expressed in Berlin-based series. Instead of analyzing American stereotypes and family values, we focus on how German identity, social norms, and the idea of Berlin as a mediated space are represented. In other words, we aim to conduct an extended replication by applying their framework to a new cultural setting. And now we would like to show another trailer, our second case from Crooks. Okay, from now on, I will hand over to my colleague Yulia Yurtaeva-Martens to present her part of our presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the introduction, dear Professor Dax and my colleague Zeynep. Let us now turn to our series analysis. I give you some impressions of that, focusing on 3 Berlin-based streaming series, 4 blogs, Dogs of Berlin, and Crooks. In the following, we will examine both the narrative and aesthetic dimensions of how this series engage with questions of Germanness and Berliness. Each of these shows explores what we can describe as a post-migrant Germanness, a form of national identity negotiated through the lens of migration, hybridity, and social diversity. In this framing, Berlin emerged not only as a physical setting, but also as a symbolic and cultural space shaped by evolving notions of nationhood. The narrative focus of this series foregrounds by hybridity and ethnic complexity. For example, for blogs, centers on a Lebanese German crime family in Neukölln district in Berlin. Dogs of Berlin shows Turkish German and East German police officers clashing with Berlin criminal and nationalist scenes. And Crooks, the trailer we have now, the most recent of the 3 series, further expands the perspective with characters of diverse ethnic backgrounds and angled in Berlin's criminal underground. The narrative strategies employed in this series reflect a clear effort to distance themselves from traditional German storytelling tropes. At the same time, the creative teams are aware of the tension between originality and recognizability. They deliberately play with cliches, not to reproduce them, but to subvert and reframe them. The goal was to offer character as stories that feel culturally specific yet emotionally universal. In this sense, Germanness becomes more of a narrative tool, something to be negotiated, complicated, or sometimes avoided, especially when the international appeal of a series is at stake. According to the creators, Berlin is one of the few German cultural signifiers with international resonance, alongside the Nazi past or Oktoberfest imagery, which they deliberately try to move beyond or destabilize. By anchoring their stories in Berlin's diverse and often contradictory social fabric, the series authors intend to create a space in which Germanness could be renegotiated, locally grounded, historically aware, but globally legible. But despite their attention to ethnic diversity, these concrete series remain heavily male-dominated. Female characters are often sidelined as a symbolic anchors for male protagonists. So while Germanness is reframed through multiculturalism, it remains marked by a gender imbalance that maybe limits the transformative potential of these narratives. With Cleo, we have one male-female character, yes, but only one in the whole series. Let's take a look on aesthetic dimensions. When we look in the aesthetic dimensions of the series, we observe that all three make extensive use of familiar urban visuals, graffiti-covered walls, panoramic skylines, and Berlin's underground club culture, and really heavily on multilingual dialogue. German is frequently interspersed with Arabic, Turkish, and English, reflecting the linguistic reality of contemporary Berlin and its diasporic communities. This multilingualism is not just decorative, but a key element in how German society is articulated and contested with these narratives. Importantly, the series also plays with familiar visual tropes associated with Berlin, and especially, like mentioned before, its notorious club scene. Cleo, for example, also. These aesthetic choices draw on the city global image as a site of creative freedom and nightlife, while recontextualizing the image within stories of migration, inequality, and precarious urban existence. In the same time, the creative teams intend to go beyond these globally recognizable signifiers of Berlin. According to the authors, one of the goals was to highlight the city's regional diversity. Not just Berlin as a brand, but Berlin is lived from within, is a city of neighborhoods, each with its own social dynamics and migrant histories. In contrast to more abstract or symbolic portrayals of Berlin, what we know, they aim to depict concrete districts like Neukölln, Wedding, Moabit, all of them as migrant districts, and their everyday realities embedded in them. In this sense, Berlin itself becomes a narrative and aesthetic device. We can call it Berliness, a space where Germanness is constantly being made, challenged, and remade. Berlin doesn't just frame these narratives, it produces meaning. It allows for a version of Germanness that is fragmented, urban, and transnational. It also allows for aesthetic experimentation and emotional proximity, maybe a way of telling national stories through the intimacy and contradictions of one complex city, Berlin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Yulia. We're coming now to our last presentation by Dr. Anna Smolarova.